Let's begin with question 1. What is a nested loop? A nested loop is simply a loop that runs inside another loop. In this Python example, the outer loop controls the rows, while the inner loop runs through each column for every row. So, when the outer loop moves to the next row, the inner loop starts again from the beginning. This is why the output shows every combination of row and column values, such as 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 2, then 1, 0, 1, 1, 1, 2, and so on. Nested loops are useful whenever you need to repeat one task inside another. Now, let's look at question 2. What are nested loops mainly used for? Nested loops are used for repeating rows and columns, making them perfect for working with tables, patterns, and grids. For example, they can generate multiplication tables, create star patterns, or process game boards and spreadsheets. Whenever a program needs to work through data arranged in rows and columns, nested loops provide an efficient and organized solution. That's why nested loops are an essential concept in programming and computer science. Let's move on to question 3. What is the outer loop responsible for? The outer loop controls the rows, or in other words, the main repetition of the program. In this example, the outer loop uses the variable row and runs 3 times, creating rows 0, 1, and 2. For each row, the inner loop is executed completely before the outer loop moves to the next row. Think of it like reading a table. You finish one row before moving down to the next. So the outer loop decides how many rows will be repeated, making it responsible for the overall structure of the nested loop. Let's look at question 4. What is the inner loop responsible for? The inner loop controls the columns, or the repeated actions that happen within each row. In this example, the inner loop uses the variable call and runs through columns 0, 1, and 2 for every row created by the outer loop. This means that while the row stays the same, the inner loop completes all the columns before the program moves to the next row. For example, when the row is 0, the program prints 0, 0, 0, 1, and 0, 2. Only then does the outer loop move to row 1. Remember, the outer loop controls the rows, while the inner loop handles all the columns within each row. Together, they make nested loops ideal for working with tables, patterns, and grids. Let's move on to question 5. Which loop executes first in a nested loop? The outer loop always executes first. It begins the process by starting the first iteration. Then, the inner loop runs completely for that outer loop iteration. In this example, the outer loop starts with row 0. The inner loop then runs through column 0, column 1, and column 2. Only after the inner loop has finished all of its iterations does the outer loop continue to the next row. So remember, the outer loop starts first, and the inner loop finishes all of its work before the outer loop moves on. Now let's answer question 6. How many times does the inner loop run? The inner loop runs completely for every iteration of the outer loop. In this example, the outer loop runs 2 times, with I equal to 0 and I equal to 1. During each outer loop iteration, the inner loop runs 4 times, with j taking the value 0, 1, 2, and 3. So the total number of inner loop executions is 2 multiplied by 4, which equals 8. A simple way to calculate this is total inner loop executions equals outer loop iterations times inner loop iterations. This relationship helps programmers predict how many times nested loops will repeat, which is especially useful when working with large amounts of data.